Well, let's go ahead and get started. I know they're picking up some of the materials, but since we're all here ready to go, I think we'd all really get started, make sure we get done on time. And what we're going to be doing today, Wendy asked me when she sat down, is are we going to be doing a mock trial? Wendy, where did you hear about mock trials?
I've done them before.
You've done them before? Okay. And they do it on television. They used to have a show where they actually showed mock trials being done, where they get a group of people like you together and they present information about a case, and then the people would act just as a jury would. We're kind of sort of going to do something like that, but we're going to do it a little different. In a mock trial, you have the lawyers present both sides of the case just as they would do in a courtroom, and you see maybe videotape or actual witnesses being presented, and you go through a whole trial. The problem with that is that the lawyers only learn from the totality of the things presented. And we have with us two lawyers, and I don't need to introduce them because their name tags are there in front of you, Georgia and Ted. And they are going to be presenting different sides, different viewpoints on this case, because they want to learn from you folks how real people, not other lawyers that they talk to all the time or consultants or experts, but how real people who are likely to be the kind of people served on the jury look at a case, so they can learn how to present it when 12 people, just like you, sit down in a jury box and listen about cases. Because of that, they've asked me to help get you folks together and help them to understand the case from each of their perspectives. Now, we're not going to do it the way they do it in a regular mock trial today, because what these attorneys understand is that when you present a case, you don't give the jury the whole information. They would get an opening statement from each side that tells the jury what those attorneys think the case is going to show. But then when the actual case is presented, you put on a piece of information, or they put on a witness one at a time, or they put on a summary, or they put on data, or medical information, whatever it happens to be. And that may take days. And so what these attorneys understand is that they don't need to just understand how you look at everything once you've been given all the information, but rather they need to understand how you look at each piece of it, so that when they present that to a jury, whether it's a testimony of a witness or an exhibit or something like that, they need to understand how people like you look at that kind of information, deal with it, what they need to know, what they don't need to know, what confuses them, what helps them understand it. So we're not going to dump, as they say, the whole load on you all at once like they would in a regular mock trial. We're going to present little pieces of information to you, kind of as they would be presented in court, so that you can help them understand how to deal with each little piece of information. Now let me tell you, I've done this for over 20 years, and every time I do one of these kind, I have somebody that raises their hand and says, Richard, I can't answer your question now because I don't have all the information. And sometime today, maybe this group will be the one exception out of the 100 or so times I've done this, but sometime today, one of you is going to raise your hand and say, Richard, I can't answer that. I'm going to warn you ahead of time so that I can remind you and say, please, let's just deal with this piece of information. Sometimes when you have a question, I want to know about that question, but I may ask you to hold it for later. And so, you've always got the questionnaire. So we're going to start by telling you that don't turn the pages individually, but if you'll turn to page 16, if you have a question that I don't cover on page 16, you can write it down, and towards sometime today, I'm going to say, okay, what are the questions that we didn't get answered that you have? Now then, that page may be blank because we do a good job, or it may be full because we haven't got to that. But feel free to write down any questions you have that we don't get to there. Sometimes I may ask you to do that. I may say, patient, that's a great question, but we need to finish this one first. So can you write that down so we can make sure we get it, that kind of thing. So does everybody understand that? Yeah. So when you raise your hand and say, I can't answer that because I don't have all the information, will you excuse me if I say, I told you that happened, but can we do it just this once? everybody, I did the first several times I did this, I didn't get that warning, but then sometimes I realized there's some anxiety that occurred. So before we get into, that's kind of the process we're going to have today. I'm going to lay out some ideas and some concepts. I'm going to ask for your reaction to them. At some point in time, I will ask these two lawyers to break their silence. It's something very difficult for lawyers to do, but I've asked them to not say anything, not respond. Even if one of you directly asks or looked over and Kim says, Georgia, what about this? Georgia's been asked very politely to not respond to that until I say it, because I may want to know what Carolyn thinks of that before I ask Georgia to answer. But as we go through, we'll talk about some concepts, and then we'll ask you what your questions are, and then they'll lay out the facts. So is that all right with everybody? Yeah. If you need to take notes, and people even in a circumstance like this sometimes need to take notes, if you'll turn to the next page, page 17, has a place for notes for you to take. And so if we're covering something and you want to take a note so you do, I will tell you at the end of the day, we're going to ask you to deliberate just as a jury would. Because we hope that over the next 3 hours or so, we're going to give you nearly all the information, if not all the information that a jury would have in a case like this. And we're going to ask you to deliberate just as jurors would. So you may want to take some notes for you to refer to when you do that part. The other thing that I want to cover with you right up front is that each of you have signed a confidentiality agreement. And lawyers take that confidentiality agreement very, very seriously. You know, we're going to give you some names and some circumstances in here today, and we're going to give you information from both sides. And so we're going to ask you to keep that confidence and not discuss anything we discuss in here outside of here. Does everybody understand that? Mm-hmm. Is there anybody that has a question about it? Okay, raise your hand. We're recording this on camera, so raise your hand if you agree to abide by that confidentiality agreement, even though you've already signed it and we've got it in writing. I'd like to have you both. Thank you. Now let me talk to you a little bit. This is going to be the longest time I talk today, promise. If I do a good job, this is the longest time I talk. I do want to tell you about the camera. You're not going to be on 60 Minutes or Prime Time or anything like that. This is one of those. I'm sure that somewhere in the United States today there are about 40 or 50 people in a group like this being recorded like this to be on television to talk about the presidential election tonight. You're not one of those. This is so that we can record it and use it to help us analyze. And as you know, you signed another agreement that says that we can show this to other attorneys. So we may be showing this to other attorneys as well to help them learn about how people think about cases. So is everybody okay with that? Yeah. Anybody have a problem with that? Okay. So let me go ahead and get started and tell you just this much about what we're going to talk about today. It has to do with the Phoenix police and an encounter with a suspect. And one of the concepts that will come up today that we hear a lot is a concept called deadly force. And the police are dealing with a suspect. So I'm not going to do this very often, but I like to start this way because it gets everybody going. When I say Phoenix police officers and deadly force, what one word comes to mind? And I'll get more than one word out of all of you. But if you could use one word, what would it be? I'll start with you, Susan. I won't always start with you, but I will this time. Susan, what one word would you think of?
Abuse of power.
Okay, great. A phrase works. Good, thank you, Susan. I won't limit you to a word. What word or phrase works for you, patient? Pardon?
Shooting.
Shooting, okay. Are you getting this? I haven't done a sound check.
Yeah.
We're okay?
Yeah, thank you.
If we have a sound problem, let me know. Carolyn, I give you a second to think about it.
Crime.
Crime. Is it choline or choline?
Choline.
Choline.
Abuse of physical abuse.
Physical abuse. Okay, Wendy?
They shot somebody dead.
They shot somebody dead. Okay, Larry?
Injury.
Injury. Jared?
Severe.
Severe. Good. Paul?
Shooting.
Shooting. Kim?
Lawsuit.
I'm sorry.
Lawsuit.
Lawsuit. Okay, that makes sense for you. Stephen?
Shooting.
Shooting. Les?
Is it justified?
Is it justified? Tell me about that. What do you ask? I'm glad I ended with you. That's a good place to start. Is it justified? How do you decide if it's justified? What do you do?
If they brandished a weapon or intended to use deadly force towards the officer. If the officer was afraid for their
So
life.
if the
Or
officer,
if they were afraid for their life or another citizen's life.
okay. Okay, good. When else is it justified? Unless that only when they're in fear for their lives or somebody else's life. Any other time, use of deadly force is justified? Anybody have?
If they're
Terrorism?
using deadly force against the police.
Okay, good. When else? So how do you know? I won't pick on you again, huh? Jared, how do you know? Les says it's justified when the police officer has fear that he or someone else is going to be seriously injured or killed. Okay? How does the police officer know that? When is that?
I guess within that, that scope of trying to figure things out, if there really is no other option for them, if at that moment they see that that's really the only option they have to use.
Paul, you're shaking your head. How do you know there's no other option?
I guess there's really no way to know fully, but they've gone through hours and hours of training, and I think they can choose at that time.
Okay. Okay. Go on.
If a gun is pointed at them.
All right. Okay. We can come back to that in a little while. Will you help me remember that, Colin? Okay. Carolyn, how does a police officer know it's threat?
I would assume they have a set of procedures.
Set of procedures. What kind of procedures would you expect there to be?
The way you approach somebody, what they're doing, the judgment they have to make, the situation it is.
Okay. Larry, what's your sense? How does a police officer decide?
I guess it would be based on his training
Okay.
and the situation that he's involved in. Sometimes it involves a gun, sometimes it involves a taser. Is there specific training for each thing that's on that belt that they carry?
Each item you use for
Yeah.
before.
Couldn't it also be where it's happening?
Oh, tell me more about that, Les. How does
Well,
where
if you're in
that-
a public place and there's 10,000 people around, you ain't gonna wanna fire a gun.
Okay.
To incapacitate a suspect, you're gonna wanna use a taser or other means.
Okay. And when do you draw the line? When does it, for 1,000 people, no, 500 maybe, 200, I mean.
When do
yeah.
you draw the line? You draw the line when there is a possibility an innocent person could be injured during taking that suspect out.
Okay, yeah, let's pause here for a second. Are you getting too much background noise for next door?
Unfortunately,
You're driving me nuts.
Yeah.
Trying to
Loud.
Are you? Okay, okay. I apologize, that's gonna be, okay, thank you.
Loud voice.
Driving me nuts too, Georgia, I'll tell you that.
talk to the hotel people.
Yeah, tell her to move over. She's standing right there.
Yeah.
Tone it down a little bit.
Okay. We will try to ignore it, and good luck back there on concrete problems for later. We may have to look at actually moving. Anyway, let me move this a little bit more to directly why we're here. Let's just say, right now, all you know is policeman says it was broken. Somebody else says it's not. That's never happened here in Phoenix, has it?
Never.
Or one, I tried, but that has happened. Okay, police says it is. Somebody else will leave that up and explain later who it is. No, it's not. But you're a juror, and your job is going to be today. One of the things you'll decide was their use of deadly force, and was it reasonable? So what are you looking for as a juror? Knowing nothing. I'm not even telling you, whether it was in this century or not, but just knowing nothing, what would that be the first kind of thing you'd want to look for? Susan, what would you look for? What would you want to know to help you decide?
The circumstances surrounding the shooting.
What kind of circumstances? What do you mean? What is there one thing?
Was the suspect putting lives in danger? I mean, the police are there to protect the people. So, as you had said, if you're in a public place, I mean, was he shooting? Was it on the freeway? Was it in a store? What are the circumstances surrounding the shooting?
Okay.
And the use of his weapon?
Okay. And has anybody got some specific circumstance you think, knowing nothing? by noon today, you'll know lots of circumstances, but for now, the jury's gonna be sitting there and they're literally going to hear that much, and they're gonna start asking themselves questions. And so I wanna know what questions are in your mind right now when the judge says this case has to do with the use of deadly force. And these people say there was, and these people say there wasn't. What goes through your mind immediately?
Did the crime fit the punishment?
Did the crime finish?
Were there drugs involved?
Were drugs involved? Okay, what else? Good. What else? Going?
What, was it a bank robbery or a hostage at someone's home?
Some situation that precipitated it. Okay, what else? Carol?
Did the suspect have fair warning, with the police, the interaction?
Ah, okay. Okay.
Was
Good.
he armed?
Was he armed? Okay. What else? We're gonna cover all these. What I do is I go around and get all the questions, because that's what these attorneys need to know. And then we see what you do with the answers to each other. What else you need to know?
My first thought was racism. Is that involved?
Is
What race
there any
they
kind of
were?
racism
Yeah.
involved? Okay, good. Like I said, we're gonna get to all these between now and about 1 o'clock and noon today. What else?
I want to
About,
know.
witness.
Larry, what witnesses? What witnesses? Were there any? And if there were, what did they say? Wendy, have you got something?
Well, hindsight is 20/20.
Ah, yes. So therefore, what would you need to know as a juror to kind of help put that hindsight?
Oh, did somebody die?
Did somebody die? So you want to know what happened to
Yeah,
the person who was shot at?
yeah.
Okay, Carol?
I wouldn't mind knowing like the timeline, the situation leading up to it step by step.
So you're the kind of person that'd like to know each step as it goes along?
If
Okay,
possible.
very good. What else?
I'd want to know if the officer had any other means to take down the suspect without using deadly force
Okay.
and without putting anyone's lives in danger.
Good. I'm thinking about seeing if we can use a different room, which would be a lot of trouble, but it'd be better than having a situation where we go through this all day and it's not useful. And so I may pause for a minute,
Pause for about 2 minutes.
about 2 minutes, and let's see what happens.
I'm gonna go out and see what I can do.
Good.
I'll go talk to her.
Well, it looked like Ted's face, he was gonna use half of deadly force to take care of it. His face was colored and.
What kind of lawyers are they?
Very good ones.
Ah.
They really are, very good ones, some of the best in the state.
Okay.
All right, we'll catch him up, but I don't want to lose too much time. We've already lost so much time. So first of all, thank you everyone for helping us relocate.
Oh.
This is much better where I can actually hear myself talking, though you guys may not want to hear me talk too much. So I want to get back to you folks talking. Again, you folks were acting as jurors now and telling me what you needed to hear to determine if your situation was you walked into a courtroom and chosen for jury duty and heard that police officer said, it's reasonable. Somebody else said, no way. What do you need? What you need to know? That's what we're going to be talking about for a while. And we've gotten a list of some of, what else I should say, what else would you need to know to help you determine as a juror whether the police officer was right or the other person was right.
Has the police officer shot anybody before?
You want to know the history of the police officer. Okay, good. What else?
Maybe what was the mood or the atmosphere of the situation? If it was too tense, it might have affected the officer's judgment.
Okay, so as much as you could about how tense the situation was.
Right.
These are great.
Did the officer just arrive on the scene, or was he there from the beginning?
How much time had it been? Okay, great.
What time of day was it?
Time of day. How about
During
that,
the day?
now, Paul?
I mean, if it's the middle of the night, compared to like 12 in the afternoon.
12 in the afternoon. Okay, good. Yes, Colin.
I'd also like to know the history of the victim. You know, then we'd find out if he was a sporadic type of
You'd like to know
personality or
as
not.
much as possible about the person who was shot at. And you notice I keep using shot at. I'm not even going to tell you whether they were hit yet or not for a few more minutes, okay?
Maybe
Yes.
they're, yeah, building on that, like maybe their, mental capacity.
Okay. I want to make sure I understand clearly, Karen. By there, you mean the person who was shot at?
Yes.
Okay. What else?
The surroundings, was it indoors, outdoors? If it was summertime and 120 out, I mean, that could escalate the situation right there.
Oh, yeah, the heat and the conditions, sure.
I don't think the victim's mental capacity or their past should have anything to do with what's going on at that moment in time.
Why not? Let's tell me about that.
Because obviously the use of deadly force was because of the incident that's happening right there and not what's going on before. Because you should only use deadly force if you are afraid for your life or somebody else.
Okay. What do you think about that? Kim, what do you think about what he just said?
I think it makes a difference if he was on drugs or drinking. Also.
He being, and by the way, we'll do that.
They-
Both when we
and-
use the term, when we use the front, he,
It could
that
be
is
a dog,
appropriate.
I don't know.
Yeah, that will be appropriate. The police officer involved in this case was he, as was the person
The victim.
who he was confronting at the time. We're both he, so we say he. So which he do you mean, Kim?
The victim.
Okay.
They
You
were
can
on
say
drugs.
victim. I'm interested in that term. It's weird you've used the term victim so far. Tell me a little bit about that. Is it just you having trouble finding the word, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Why
The
victim,
person.
Kim? What? And I think was it when did
I
you
used
calling?
it.
Yeah, there's
Only
somebody over
because
here.
I'm not a lawyer, I don't know the term, so
I'd say
I'm just thinking
suspect.
someone was
I would
shot.
say subject.
Subject. Okay.
That's good.
Okay. But I'd like to know, Beck. You just couldn't think anything else. But
Well,
why?
the only reason I
Victim
came up with that
popped
is
up.
because I was thought, well, they were shot, so
Okay.
more of a victim than,
Just being
I
shot,
just didn't know
regardless
the
of the
words.
circumstances, makes you okay.
I'm
That's
just
it.
figuring that they're the person that is wanting something from this. So.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Well, let me tell you, in this case, the TID represents the suspect, the person who was shot at, and we'll get to whether he's hit in just a minute. And Georgia represents the police officer in the city of Phoenix. And so now I'm going to start to fill in some of these questions that you've asked, and we're going to see kind of what you need to know and how you need to know about it. And this is a civil case where you've probably figured out that the person who was shot at, well, that gives it away, doesn't it? The person who was hit, that is still alive, is suing the police officer, saying that the use of force was not appropriate. So I tell you that just to kind of show you placing. And in a civil case, the plaintiff usually always goes to go first, because what they have is called a burden of proof. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes so you know what that means. I tell you that just so you know that a lot of times I may go to Ted first, don't take anything out of that, except that's the way it would work in a courtroom. But sometimes when it's more appropriate, I'll ask Georgia to answer questions. So I want to go ahead and start by answering Jared's question about what time of day it was, and after all that soliloquy, Ted, will you tell us what time of day it was?
3 p.m., 3
Okay.
o'clock in the afternoon.
Georgia, what kind of day was it?
It was a clear sunny day. It wasn't rainy or anything.
So Jared, how does that help you? What would you do with that information?
I guess just that alone doesn't really help. I mean, you need to know.
It's pretty basic, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So what else would you need to know? What would you want to know next?
I guess a timeline, what escalated it, why is the whole thing even happening? How did we get to that situation?
Okay, so but that's one of those, Jared, where you're jumping way ahead of me. If we give you the whole timeline, we've
Right.
given you the whole case. So pick one, pick something. What is it that you'd like to know next? Not totally, but next.
I guess, why was the officer called there?
What precipitated this circumstance? Carolyn, you had something too.
Location.
Location. Okay. Since Ted's going to get to go first, most of the time I'm going to ask Georgia, do you mind telling us where this particular circumstance was located? Just the actual location.
The actual location was at 7th Street, just in McDowell, just west of 7th Street in
Okay.
McDowell, on McDowell.
So does that location mean anything to anybody? Yes.
it does to me. It's a lower income area, kind of hodgepodgey.
Pardon? Walgreens?
Walgreens is right there.
The Walgreens is right there?
I
Okay,
was
are you
there
familiar?
yesterday.
Let me ask you that. Which of you are familiar? We said that now, so I don't know which way to do this. Just raise your hand if you're familiar. When we said 7th McDowell, who said, okay, got a picture of it in my mind. Okay, everybody.
Did this happen during the weekend or a weekday?
Why, tell me a little bit less about why that would make a difference
The amount of people that are in the area.
in the area. Okay, so that'd help you figure out whether, the question you had earlier about if there's lots of people in the area, that'd help you with
That's
that
where
one.
schools
Susan, what else?
And building on what you said, if it's a weekday or a weekend, it would build on the type of people because it's close to downtown, so a lot of people, even at 3 o'clock, I mean, some people, I used to get off of work and you would go right past it. And
Okay.
So I mean, you know, there's Starbucks there, and so I mean, it's the type of, what type of, you know, people are in the area. I mean, is it, you know, versus, you know, people who work or.
Okay, yes. Oh,
I know there's an elementary school near there, so it makes me think some kids do get out around 3. Was there an issue with little kids?
There's also
Okay.
a grocery store right there too.
Okay,
Was it a traffic stop?
okay. You want to know if it was a traffic stop? Ted, was it a traffic stop?
No.
Okay. So what does that mean? Wendy, how does that help? Just, does it clear up anything for you?
Well, you know, in order to be, when you're stopped by a police officer, there has to be probable cause for stopping you.
Okay. So you want, where you're going is someplace I'm going to get in a minute, and I have to do that like a last, cut to hold that for just a little while in terms of probable cause.
Was the officer responding to a robbery or a domestic or a fight?
Can we just get to that next, Les? And I want to finish kind of, when you heard the location, what else popped in your mind? We were getting some really good stuff and we got off that. Carol?
It's funny how it's judgmental, like she thinks it's not the best neighborhood, but actually there's a lot of, you know, a lot of things around.
So you see it a little differently.
Thanks Art Museum, the library's right near there. I mean,
The hospital's right down the street.
maybe there's a lot worse places in town.
A lot worse places. Okay, okay. What else do you see? Steve?
I know someone's asked, like, what day of the week, but can we find out, like, when it happened? Was it, you know, during summer?
Okay.
You know, I mean, the kids wouldn't be in school, you know, I mean, but there's other things that could be going on. McDowell, like, you know, in the fall, we just, you know, if you go west of McDowell, you have the fairgrounds, so, I mean, it could have been, you know.
Okay, so you want to know if there's something else that could have affected the whole environment in this situation. All right. Well, let's go ahead, because I think we need to, because we took so much time moving, we need to kind of move forward. So then I'll ask you to kind of tell us the you know, general environment of the situation, the time of year, time of day, that kind of thing.
Okay, it was February 25th, 2011. That was a Friday. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Do you want me to tell them what happened, or?
No, I don't.
You don't think so?
Let me tell you, you folks are wanting to hear, and these lawyers are wanting to tell you, and I'm going to have to keep this going. All right. Anything about that? February 3 o'clock, February 10th, 3 o'clock, 25th, I'm sorry, 3 o'clock.
Well,
Susan?
it could maybe rule out, because during the summertime, you know, in Arizona, it's really, really hot, so it seems that there's a lot more.
Yeah, the point that was made earlier,
Yeah,
that
so-
the heat might create more
Right.
tension and difficult circumstance. So, okay,
that ends
that
up-
helps, yeah. Karen?
It's sort of a rush hour time, and Friday is probably the worst day for rush hour.
Okay, so you expect a lot of traffic in the area? Okay, cool.
I think some people get paid on Fridays, and some believe in having a drink first thing on Friday, so there could be some not
You hear Friday
clear-thinking
afternoon,
people.
that goes through your mind? Okay, good, that's what we need. Great, Wes?
I don't know if it has anything to do with this, but that's about the time of the year people start getting their income taxes back.
Okay. I see where you're all going with that. All right. Well, what would be the next thing you'd want to know then?
Was there a bar involved? Was he coming from a bar? Or?
Okay, Georgia, that's an easy one. Yeah, was there a bar involved?
No.
Okay.
Was he by himself?
I'll start with Georgia, when there's not, when it would be appropriate. Go ahead, Paul.
Was the suspect by himself?
That's Georgia.
Yes.
Okay. Lisa, see, we can participate. Carol, what else do you need to know?
Public area or private residence?
Tell me about how that makes a difference. I think I know, but I want to make sure I
Maybe
understand fully.
the officer's crowd issue of whether they're
Okay.
dealing with more people.
All right. So Ted, why don't you fill us in a little bit about everybody wants to know about the crowd. I'm trying to.
Okay, well,
Was
yeah,
there, now, let me make sure, we're not gonna get into the individual, but was there a crowd, was there a lot of traffic, was there a lot of people around at this point in time?
There were pedestrians around on the street, and there was a construction site right in the area where this occurred, where there was ongoing construction.
Okay, so what? That mean anything to anybody?
Was he working? Was the person working?
Was the suspect, we'll go ahead, we're okay to call it a suspect at this point. Was the suspect working?
At the construction site.
No, he was not working at the construction site. Notice I emphasized at the construction site, yeah. Karen, what do you need to?
When you said construction, and if he's not working there, I know there's always in the paper stuff about, things getting stolen construction-wise, so that came to mind.
Okay. Fine.
It made me think that there are people outside working and they might not be visible. Some might be up high, down low, so you'd have to be very alert to the police officer.
Okay, the police officer need to be alert of people in the area. There's construction. Okay, what else?
Was this suspect suicidal?
Make sure I get to that one in about an hour, okay? Now, I'm saying there is or there isn't, but that's a question where we will get to some stuff on that right now.
This might be a stupid question, but was he or she involved in a crime, or were they just
Okay,
being
Larry?
accused of a
Good.
crime?
I'm going to go ahead and get. Ted and George are going to get a chance to do this. I'm kind of moving a little faster here because of lost time. Let's go ahead and discuss what got these people, the police officer and the suspect, to this location. And I'm going to give both of you a chance. So George, if Ted says anything you don't agree with, you can fill in, but I'm going to let Ted go first.
Okay, so I can tell them.
What led up to, just
All right,
as
what
far
led
as
up- all right,
we're,
gotcha.
we've got these two people at 7th and McDowell and there. We'll see what happens after that.
There was a armed robbery at a Circle K at McDowell and 15th Street.
15th Avenue.
I'm sorry, 15th Avenue. I just wrote down 15th. Circle K at McDowell and 15th Avenue, and somebody was killed. There was a report out to the police and their squad cars about this, and that it had been reported that the suspect was wearing a dark shirt and Levi's, was driving, am I giving too much detail?
Keep going. No,
Was
it's fine.
driving a
Accelerating.
beat-up blue Toyota Corolla, and that he was of Middle Eastern descent, appeared to be a Middle Eastern person. My client, can I call him my client instead of the suspect?
I think that probably would be preferable to you, yes.
My client his name was Ali Garcia, and he is of Middle Eastern descent. He was on his way to work. He worked as a line cook at a restaurant called the Trojan Horse, which is on 32nd Street in McDowell. He was supposed to be at work at 3 o'clock. He was late. He was alone in his vehicle. He had nothing to do with anything that happened at the Circle K. He was just going to work. He was driving.
That one you got a little ahead of me on, but go ahead.
Sorry.
Keep going.
He was driving a blue, relatively new Hyundai. Should I keep going?
Just, I think we need to get them located in their
Right,
position.
so he's
because-
driving to work. A police officer sees him and motions him to pull over. He pulls over.
Okay, that's far enough.
All right.
Thanks. All right. Anything important in what, first of all, Georgia, you corrected him on Avenue. Is there any other corrections that need to be made in terms of your perspective of the details here.
Correction?
Or anything you'd like to add at this point.
Well, I'll add a couple of things. The name of the officer is Richard Lane. He'd been on the police force for approximately 1 year. And he was driving eastbound on McDowell when what's called a hot tone came out over the radio. And a hot tone is alerts all police officers that something serious has happened. And that's when he, along with other officers in the area, received the information that there had been a homicide in the Circle K at 15th Avenue in McDowell. And that's when, and the description of the suspect was that he was of Middle Eastern descent, jeans, and wearing a black t-shirt. And that's when Officer Lane saw him driving a blue older Toyota Corolla. That's when he saw Ali Garcia driving in the blue Hyundai with a black t-shirt and dark complected on McDowell heading eastbound and motions him over.
Okay. Now, we know from talking to jurors afterwards that sometimes when they hear things like that, you haven't heard all the information, but they hear a piece of information and say, this helps me, this is something I need to hold on to and see what to do with it. Larry, was there anything in there that, from either side, you just heard that particularly got your attention?
I guess the cars, like cops should know better.
Okay.
Vehicles, like a Toyota don't really look like a Hyundai to me.
Okay. What else? Conan? I'm going to come back to that in just a minute, okay?
The cars, if it was, I was thinking it wasn't necessarily a police officer that said it was a Corolla. I thought maybe it was a witness. So I could understand the difference in cars because I don't know the difference. But I thought what was very important is the fact that it happened at 3 p.m. and the man probably was driving at ultimate speed to get to work at 3. So I thought that was important.
Okay, so you felt like Mr. Garcia was probably speeding?
Well, or going as fast as he could.
Or as fast as he
Not
possibly
necessarily,
could.
you know, at 35, if it's a 35 zone. So I would think that would make him look more possible.
Okay, so the fact he liked to work was important. What else? Patience.
I start to feel like it was almost racist because the officer saw a guy of Middle Eastern descent wearing black shirt, driving a different car from the description, and he pulled him over. That's like if they said that the description of the guy was Caucasian and he was wearing black shirt and driving a blue older car. Like, you have to think, would he have pulled over, you know, a Caucasian man as opposed to the Middle Eastern guy?
Okay.
When it's a different description on the car?
What the rest of you think about that? I want to make sure everybody, Wendy, what do you think? Does that sound like there could be some aspects of profiling there involved?
Well, he's pulling over someone that fits description, a general description. I think he, you know, pulling him over, he was probably justified in pulling him over.
Okay, sometimes I'll do this. We've got two different versions here. I wonder which of you are leaning a little bit more thinking like Patience, that maybe there was some little bit of racism. Raise your hand, just for now. No? So we're thinking more like Wendy? Okay, blue car, black shirt. We assume we couldn't see the pants if he was driving. That's enough. Wes?
Well, I do want to know, was the officer plainclothes or was he uniform?
How does that help you?
Because that would
to look at this
determine the subject's demeanor
Okay.
of the officer upon getting pulled over.
Okay. I want to deal with what else? Susan?
I would also say that it would also say since he was only on the force a year, plainclothes officers are usually from, I don't know, just hearing in school.
Mhm.
Usually they've been on the force a lot longer, so they have a lot more experience. So they might, a
Okay, so that'd be
discrepancy in the cars, they may not see.
All right, well, so Georgia, let's cover that. I'm gonna go ahead and do two things. I want you to cover the plainclothes versus uniformed officer. And then I'm gonna go ahead, because of the comments made, I'm gonna ask you to tell us what Officer Lane said about the Hyundai versus the Toyota.
Okay. Well, first of all,
And if you disagree with him, as always.
Can I ask the race of the officer? No one ever asked that.
That's a good question,
And
Kim.
he
I
might be
went right by it.
Middle Eastern, so
Okay.
if he.
And why don't you, Georgia, while you're answering, why don't you
White
throw
man.
that? White Caucasian man.
White man. Officer Lane was driving a fully marked patrol vehicle in full winter uniform, which is a dark colored uniform, the badge, the utility belt, and all the equipment on the utility belt. And the patrol vehicle, it's standard, like sometimes they call them the bubblegum lights, but the lights on the top. So that's how Officer Lane, appeared when he stopped Mr. Garcia. And you asked me, the second part of the question was?
To discuss what Officer Lane had to say about the.
Oh, about the difference.
About the difference in the
Yes.
vehicles.
He said, it's his experience, that witnesses, because if you're a witness to a homicide and somebody, which apparently the witnesses were, the homicide at McDowell and 15th Avenue, it's a very sort of a traumatic situation, it's a very excitable situation to those people, and witnesses often get descriptions wrong. Heights and weights are often wrong. The cars, people don't know the difference between cars. You don't know he would not know who the witnesses were, because he's in his patrol vehicle patrolling, and he's getting this information over dispatch, which is what the people at the Circle K, that is the witnesses at the Circle K, were relaying to dispatch, and dispatch is relaying to him, and he knows that all he knows is it's a blue car, it's a sedan, it's not a Toyota Corolla, but it's generally in the description that they were that he was given.
Okay. Larry, what do you think?
Well, like she was saying, like the witnesses don't get stuff right sometimes, so that's.
What do the rest of you
that's a
think
big
about that?
factor.
But Stephen, just a minute.
Well,
Yes.
I mean, they gave a pretty accurate description. I mean,
Okay.
a lot of times people say, I saw a blue four-door car, and they don't maybe know the make and model, but I mean, it sounded like the witness had, a pretty good description of the car, make and model included, so.
Okay. So, yes.
I would think they would know the difference, between older and newer.
Maybe in-
They would, if
maybe-
they said older car.
When you say they, you'll notice I'll do
I
this,
mean,
anytime people use pronouns, I want to make sure I completely understand. When you say they, you're talking about police
I'm
officers.
talking about the witnesses.
The witnesses.
The
Oh, okay, the
witnesses.
witnesses.
I would
Okay,
think
so I
when
was
they-
confused there.
When they gave them the description of an older or newer car.
So it's not the blue or the Hyundai Toyota, but the new old that causes you
Yeah.
some, okay.
I mean, I can understand them getting the make wrong, but when you look at a car and if you can see it's beat up, and you say, okay, well, a beat up older car, or just an older car, versus a Brake Cheney brand new car, you're gonna be like, I know the difference between those two.
Okay.
Even though I don't know the difference between, that I may have gotten the make wrong, because I don't know cars.
All right,
but
I
know
think
the
Ted's
difference
paying
between older and newer.
very close attention to what you're saying here, and probably so is Georgia, because that's an interesting distinction we haven't made before. Carolyn, what were you going to say about that?
When I heard the description, I actually thought, I know you said there was detail, but I actually thought there was less detail, which meant that there would be more judgment on the part of the police to just sort of.
By less detail, tell me more about what you mean about that.
Well, there wasn't any plate number or any partial
Oh, I
plate
see.
number.
Okay.
And the description is so generic. I mean, I could go out on the street and probably pull over half a dozen people this afternoon. That looked like
Okay.
you know what I mean? Like, you know, dark shirt, Levi jeans. It's like the uniform of boys in this town. And
Yeah, I'm working dressed like that.
and I don't know, it was kind of general, so it sort of does leave a little more judgment to the police that they know it's a little more general, and so they've got to really cover their bases of what's right around there at the moment.
Okay, wonderful segue then. So let's start with Jared. Was the stop reasonable? We're not talking about what happened after the stop, just Holly being pulled over, was it reasonable? In your thoughts?
I'd like to know how he was pulled over. I know sometimes a police officer, and it sounded like the wording you used,
Okay.
he was pointed at and told. Well, to me, and I probably shouldn't say this on tape, but I've been pointed at and told to pull over, and you know what? I just kept going on to work, because my main concern was getting to work on time, and I don't think he can jump in his car and get me,
Okay.
like he's gonna, I thought, well, those fools, those other ones are pulling over. So I think if he were
All right,
done like that, I think
I'm
it
gonna
was
let this happen
safer.
once, but, okay, let's go ahead.
To extend on that, was it a felony stop or did he approach the car as if it was just a regular traffic stop?
Boy, you keep getting ahead of me. Let me finish this and then we'll get right back to that. Georgie, are you ready for that one?
Oh, a felony stop?
felony stop, yes.
I'm ready for that.
Okay. Susan, I want to do this. I told you I'm going to ask you, sometimes ask you something. I want to know, based on what you've heard so far, was this stop reasonable? Now, you're going to hear more, but based on what you've heard so far, did he have, as we've been pointed out to us, what's called reasonable cause to pull Allie over? Did Officer Lane have reasonable cause? Jared, I'm going to go around this way this time. Everybody gets to answer this. Was there reasonable cause or not?
I would say yes. I mean, he did kind of, sort of fit the description. Maybe the car wasn't perfect, but like, we mentioned before, witnesses don't always get things correct. So you don't want to exclude somebody that might possibly be the suspect.
Okay.
And if he's in the area, he kind of does fit the description. It doesn't necessarily mean he's profiling him. He just fits that description, so.
Okay. Paul?
I think same thing. He's in the same general area. It's a blue car, Middle Eastern descent suspect, dark shirt. I'd pull him over.
Okay. Kim?
I say yes, that it was, but I have a question also.
He's
Yeah.
got something we need to explain to him, but I'm going to come back and get your question, then I'm going to get your explanation after I go around all the way. But, so yes? Stephen?
I say yes. I mean, he has, seconds to make a decision.
You mean the
so
police officer?
The police officer has seconds, when he sees this car and, like we've discussed, the gentleman fits the description, so, you want to pull him over, and find out.
Okay, Les, what's the reason? What's the reasonable cause? No, why not?
I think the officer should have trailed him to get his behavior if he was going to speed off or act like a normal citizen. And then, once he gets more information, then pull him over.
Okay. That is definitely a gift for Ted. Susan?
I think he was reasonable in pulling him over. You only have a certain amount of time before suspects leave an area, so I think that he was justified in pulling him over.
Patient?
I think, no, not. 'Cause
Okay.
I agree with Les. I think you should have trailed him.
No, there's something else good. Okay, Carolyn?
I think it probably was reasonable. I don't know that they'd have the luxury of trailing someone at that moment.
Colleen?
I think it was very reasonable, and my question again was he in his vehicle behind him, but I'm thinking he wasn't, so.
I'm gonna get to that in 1 second. I promise you, we're gonna get these 3 things done. I just want to get through this, so go ahead.
Yes, it was a reasonable stop.
Okay, Larry?
No, I don't think so.
Tell me why.
Based on the description of the car not being 100%, I understand the suspect being the descent that they're looking for, but I also factor in the officer's experience, only being on the force for a year. I think he should have did like what he was saying, follow the suspect, radio it in, stay behind them. If they say, okay, stop them, or, just go from there.
Okay. I'm gonna caucus with each one of these, just 1 second individually. Do you want to talk to her? Why don't you come over here a second? I'm gonna take Georgia to talk about Whether they could have followed or not, it really is not important. I'd like to move on, but if you think.
No, they wouldn't.
And can you respond, yeah, they would have? Disagree with George?
I threw them away at home.
Yeah,
thinking
what I ask is if you could, if you could come up with a reason why. Okay. Well, we need to throw that, we learn something. Okay. We've decided, I was going to move on, but we decided that we're going to respond to those, and Georgia would like to respond to those who say, no, it wasn't reasonable, because could have followed him, and I think that probably had something to say about that. Let me just, real quick, Colleen asked a question that I think needs to be answered before. She asked if he was just waved over. Can you fill that in and then get to it?
Oh, no, the siren was flipped on, lights were flipped on, and he was waved over. You know, get in front of me, in other
Okay,
words.
so
get
that
in front
answers
of
your
me.
question? Okay,
Yeah.
I thought we need to have that
Yes.
answer so they know the process. All right. Tell me, could have the Officer Lane have just followed Mr. Garcia?
Not under these circumstances, not when you have a homicide that just occurred at 15th Avenue in McDowell. You have a person who's driving a car that generally meets the description, a person who's physically meets the description, whose clothing, at least from the waist up that you can see, meets the description. You don't know where this person is going, and you've got to find out, is this the person? So you can either say it is, or say, you know, once you have contact with him, this isn't the guy, and you can let him go on, and then you can begin to canvass and look around for the actual suspect. So it's a way of either including him or excluding him and letting him go on his way.
Okay. Ted, do you agree with all that?
No, I don't agree with that. I think that it would have been reasonable to follow him at least for a short distance. He could have better ascertained whether or not this vehicle in fact did match the description, which it may generally have, but it was not the same kind of vehicle. He was pulling him over based on his race and the color of his car, basically, and the fact that he was wearing a dark shirt, which is, there was no evidence at that point in time that he was exceeding the speed limit or doing anything unlawful. I suspect that if the call had been that it was a Caucasian man in a dark shirt in a blue vehicle, would that be fair to pull him over just because he's of Middle Eastern descent? I think it would have been more reasonable for him to be followed, at least long enough to identify whether or not the car was the right car, whether or not this guy was acting suspicious, was doing anything to indicate to the officer that this was in fact likely a murder suspect fleeing a scene.
Okay.
Did I overdo that?
No, you both did fine. I am. There we go. Everybody turn to page 14. Now you've heard both sides. And we have here, it looks like this, a whole bunch of questions you can't possibly answer right now because there are no questions there. So you'll notice at the top it says statement A and then there's a blank. Would you write in there, the stop of Mr. Garcia was reasonable. We're talking probable cause here, but instead of writing probable cause, I write reasonable. Then tell us if you agree or disagree with that, how strongly you agree or disagree with it, and why, after you've heard the two statements. And then we're going to move on from that point and get Kim's question and Les's question.
Can we change our view now? I mean,
That's what I'm testing. That's what I'm doing. You can decide, you know, after I've heard George and Ted, I think a little differently about this.
Is this an ongoing case, or has the case already been? Can't tell.
Let me answer that a little later, Paul. And we'll tell you what kind of lawyers these guys that these two are also.
I was gonna know, like,
He asked that during.
if it was solved,
when
and
you
we'll
two were
find
around.
out, like, the results or not.
Yeah. Okay. All right, and in the interest of time here, I'm going to go ahead and move on. We've got those answers now. You folks will have a chance to discuss that more later on. But now we've got Officer Lane having pulled over Mr. Garcia. What do you need to know next to determine? Obviously, we haven't got to deadly force unless you had a question about that.
Was this a felony stop? Or
Was it a felony stop? Yeah. Okay. You want to talk about felony stop?
You want to give the details of a felony stop
Yeah.
too?
Yes.
The answer is it was a felony stop. And the officer.
Miss Georgia, just a second. Where'd you come up with that
I
term?
was going to ask.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Thank you. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not
I
less.
witnessed in person a felony stop, and I've never been a part of a
Okay,
felony.
that's why I hesitated asking.
Yeah.
Then I realized I was looking at everybody's faces, going felony stop. I thought,
Felony
I don't want to embarrass you, but Les, how do you know about the word felony stop?
Felony stop is when they pull you out of your vehicle at gunpoint right away.
Okay, go ahead then, Georgia. We got that.
Um,
Georgia will explain it to you.
I'll give the details of the felony stop. Felony stop procedure is different than if anybody's, for example, has been ticketed, you know, and you see the little lights going, or the little whoop whoop, you pull over to the side, and the officer approaches by your window and asks for your license and registration. That's your typical traffic stop. A felony stop is different. A felony stop occurs when an officer believes that the person inside the vehicle is armed and is dangerous and has a reason to believe that, and is a danger, you know, either to himself as the officer or a danger to the people around him. And so a particular procedure is used, and that procedure is as follows. The officer will open his car door and stand behind the car door so that he's crouched down below, and he has his gun drawn, so that he has protection. Other vehicles are usually, other patrol vehicles will arrive, and I'll tell you about the configuration in just a second. But that officer, who's the principal officer, will give certain directions to the suspect that he has now stopped as part of the felony stop procedure, and that is throw your keys out the window, because they want to make sure that the vehicle is stopped and can't start again. Open your car door from the outside. Put your hands out the window and open it from the outside so they can see their hands, and the hands aren't kept down below eyesight of the officer. Step out of the vehicle. Put your hands up above your head, and what that does is it raises your jacket or your shirt. They have you turn 360 degrees so they can see the waist, to see if you have a gun that's tucked in either in the waist, front, or back. They tell you to interlock your fingers behind your hand and behind your head, and to walk backwards to the sound of their voice. And that's to keep that person off balance, because it's obviously harder to walk backwards than it is forwards. Then at a certain point, they're told to stop, and an officer can tell that person typically to kneel and cross their feet at the ankles, because again, that keeps that person off balance. And at that time, the officer then approaches, will handcuff the person, pat them down quickly to make sure there is no weapon that's available, and then the situation is controlled. And that's the felony stop procedure. There are other officers, patrol vehicles, that are involved in a felony stop procedure, and they arrive at the same time, so to speak, and they take up positions next to the stopping officer and behind the stopping officer, again, to give a lot of coverage, if you will, to the first officer who stopped, and to cover the entire area so that they have a good lookout. So that's the typical procedure
Okay.
that's used.
Not anything about this case, but is that your understanding of felony stop procedures?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right. So what difference does that make, Les? I watch everybody pretty attentive listening to this. You've seen it. What difference does it make that this was a felony stop?
That would determine how the subject reacted to the stop and his behavior.
Okay. Anybody else? Felony stop, so what? Susan?
I would think because he's of Middle Eastern descent, maybe he didn't understand the officer. Maybe a cultural something,
So you'd want to know about that, whether there was any communication problem?
right language, maybe he just didn't understand our value system versus his own cultural identity. You know, maybe he saw those people and he was scared. And
Language barrier.
Okay. Let me just take care of that. Was there any language barrier, cultural differences?
No.
Your client had? Okay. I understand why I asked Ted that. It's his client that we're talking about. Okay. What else? Felony stop. So what, Carol?
I just got a little alarmed because like my car window on my car is not going down right now. And when I heard that, I was like,
So don't commit a felony and you're okay.
Maybe.
and I've had it like taken like 3 times to the dealership and still, so I've tried, but, so I'm just sort of wondering, like there's certain steps you might not be able to.
So because of your experience, you're wondering if there was something that the suspect, his client, possibly had difficulty with in that. Okay. So what else? Anything else that's left? Yes.
No, Arizona's a concealed carry state.
Mhm.
Was he armed?
We'll get to that. Jared, what do you?
Was the felony stop based on something else that the suspect did, or was it just based on the description and because?
Would you think there should be something else, or?
Well, I would assume if somebody just matches a description, you wouldn't do a felony stop on them if you don't know.
Okay. How do the rest of you feel about that?
Well, I think that, I mean, if you got a call in that there's a homicide, you know, and you're pulling over the potential subject, you know, you probably do a felony stop. I mean, you want to rule out, you know, the fact that he has any weapons that you can pull on you during that stop. So.
Okay. George, so in terms of police policy, what about Jared's question?
Well, the felony stop it's done because, the reason it's done is because a felony has been committed. And in this case, it's the homicide at Circle K. And the officer is just trying to control that person so that he can make contact with that person thinking it's possibly the suspect. And then either he is, and they can then continue with their investigation and potential arrest, or it's not him, at which point you let the person go.
So, but would that be a common practice to, I mean, do they do that for everybody? They're pulling over every suspect?
Felonies, if a felony has been committed.
Okay.
If a felony has been committed.
Yes, that's fine.
And we're talking about, it's a physical danger. I'm not talking about somebody kited a check for $50 or something that might fit a felony, you know, but we're talking about a homicide in this case.
Considering a felony stop, is that the officer's decision or does that come from a sergeant or?
What do you think it should be? Don't answer yet, John.
I will.
What do you think?
I think it should be supervisor's
If
decision.
you think what?
Pull over the wrong car, you might have a situation.
Okay, what do the rest of you think about that? Susan?
I don't think it should be supervisor's decision because the police go through so much training that I think that if they can't make that decision, then what good are they? Especially if they're.
Okay, so the police officer should be able to make it.
When there's a high-speed pursuit, the supervisor is the one that tells them to pull out.
Okay.
I have a question more about the description of why he thought he was Middle Eastern, and I don't want to sound racist.
So what's your question there? How do you decide someone looks Middle Eastern?
Well, I'm asking, was he wearing a turban?
Turban?
And is that why the police thought he was Middle Eastern and pulled him over?
I'm going to let Ted respond to that. Was your client wearing a turban, or they had any other Middle Eastern paraphernalia obvious?
No.
Okay.
And was the guy in the Circle K wearing one?
That's a good question. Are we aware of that? I believe the answer is no.
We're not aware.
Not aware.
No one reported to the police that.
That wasn't part of the physical description.
That was not part of the physical. Good, thank you. That's the right answer. Not part of the physical description. All right, so where do we go from here? What do you need to know next? I want to move on to the next question. Larry?
Were there more than one suspect pulled over? And, because that's a big general area from, what was it, 15th Avenue?
7th Street.
And then they stopped him at 7th Street, right? I'm bad at taking notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big area.
That's a wide area, so was there other Toyotas or Hondas pulled over too? Can you answer
At
that?
this point, no.
Jumping the gun? No?
What,
I just answered that, okay.
from the time of the robbery and the time of being pulled over, how much time elapsed?
How does that affect whether or not?
Because I've only lived in Phoenix 4 months, so 15th Avenue is quite a ways from 7th Street,
Mhm.
you know.
So what you want to know is there
And there's a light. every
reasonable
four-
amount
there's
of
a-
time to think that the
There's a
blue
light
person
every
could
4
run.
blocks, you
Yeah.
know? So, I mean, if it was 2 minutes, obviously he's not gonna make it from 15th Avenue to 7th Street in 2 minutes. you
Okay.
know?
Is there any question that Mr. Garcia could have gotten from the place where the incident happened to his location? Has there been any allegations that that's physically not possible, as Les's question?
No.
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 No, okay. So, can't give you the exact time, but I can tell you the time was appropriate for the officer to believe it. What else did you do?
Was your client able to follow the instructions of the
What do you
focus stop?
expect, Caroline? What do you expect?
I don't know, I suppose if somebody doesn't, then that sort of raises the adrenaline situation of that they might be that dangerous
What
person.
circumstances could occur where a person wouldn't follow the instructions that you can think of?
Well, I gave one example.
You gave one example. Couldn't get your window down. Excellent example, too. Stephen?
Well, just seeing, all these police officers come up behind you and, ordering you to get out of your car and ordering you to do all this stuff. I mean, he could have been scared.
Okay, could have been scared. And you said, I want just real quick, you said all of these police officers. I've been trying to concentrate on another thing. What do you mean by all of these police officers?
Well, we know that one pulled him over. I would assume that, for a felony stop, he would have called for backup.
Okay.
And Georgia explained, the procedure, how they, park their cars back and off, to the side a little bit to provide protection, so.
So, now I want to get everybody's opinion. Paul, why in the world would somebody not follow instructions under the circumstances Stephen just described?
Don't understand.
Don't understand? Language problem, we discussed that. Okay, why else? Jared?
Well, just to clarify, Ted, you did say that there was no language barrier.
Okay, he can't answer until I tell him to. Go ahead.
There was
So ask the question and I'll decide about the answers, okay?
No, there was not a language barrier.
Okay. What else?
I know in my SUV, I had to wonder if I could get my short arm to my door handle.
Door, so you might not be able to open the door, okay.
And then I know don't recall if she said he had to show his license. In one of my vehicles, when a police officer pulled me over, I had to say, I have to open my trunk, because that's where I kept my purse to get my license. And that could be a problem.
Okay. What else? Susan?
Could the suspect have been preoccupied, maybe listening to music, or maybe he didn't hear the officer?
Didn't hear? Why else might he not? I'm going to go ahead and let people fill this in, but I'm just wondering how many people come up. Any other reasons you can think? Let's go ahead. Yes.
Not being able to pull over at that moment in time because of traffic.
Okay. He was able. I would sometimes just feel like he was able to pull over. The traffic wasn't a problem.
I think just the fact that he thought he was pulling over because he looked the way he did, and
Okay.
maybe past experiences here that happened like on the news that I've seen recently.
Ted, did your client feel like he could hear? Is it statement of your client that he could hear the officers?
A statement is that he could not hear.
Could you tell
He
this
could
group?
hear bits and pieces.
What can you tell this group his explanation of why he could not hear?
There was a construction site right next to where he was stopped, and it was very noisy.
Okay. Does that sound reasonable? Then give you a chance later on.
Yeah, that's fine.
Does that sound reasonable? So what do you do? Let me ask you.
It's not that loud, I don't think.
Pardon?
I don't think it would be that loud where you'd not hear the cop sirens. And I would want to
Okay, now you heard the sirens and he pulled over.
I would wonder if he heard him on like if he had the thing on the microphone loud, or if he was just did he get out of the car and tell him to get out and yell, or?
Okay. What do you think? What would your expectation be of that?
I don't know. I couldn't hear either probably, unless he was on the microphone thing.
Okay. Larry?
I'm just curious if he put his window down, or has this guy ever been stopped before? He could have been nervous because he's never been stopped. Was he new here? There's a few different factors.
Okay.
Was he on probation?
I'm sorry?
Was he on probation?
Was he on probation? Was there some reason why you would prefer not to hear? Okay. Not here. All right.
I'd like to know kind of what Kim said, because I've been pulled over and the guy had to get on the speaker because I was nervous and couldn't understand.
Okay, I'm trying to decide which of these lawyers to respond to that. I think I'll have both of them. Kim and Colleen said, what about the speaker, the loudspeaker?
They tried to use it, it didn't work. They were yelling.
So what
That
difference does
sucks.
that make?
That's a big difference.
Is that part of the inspection in the morning before you get in the vehicle? You mean not work, meaning he picked it up and?
He tried to use it, it didn't work.
Yeah, I would
They
think that would
couldn't
be
call
part of the
somebody in
inspection.
who had one? And they just wait?
He'd be gone by then.
Okay.
If he was sitting in his car, then, and he'd been pulled over, and he pulled over like they said,
Yep.
like they wanted him to.
But Stephen says there's other police cars already there. So
So why didn't they use theirs?
what the rest do you think? Why not? Why didn't they use that?
I don't know if he was sitting in the car or if he got out when he couldn't hear him, and then that's when he got shot.
It's one of those where you're kind of getting ahead of me, Kim. Remember when I said at the very beginning, you're going to want to have a lot more information. I'm going to want to talk about this one. That's one of those. We're going to cover all of those things, and hopefully in the next few minutes. So, but I'm here to, I'm kind of counting there. I mean, I will hear that there, in fact, at one point in time, there were 3 other cop cars there. I'm sorry, jumping ahead of us a little bit. So, what do you expect? Why didn't they use it of them? What is your expectation? Susan?
Was it maybe a clash of authority? I mean, maybe the police officer didn't want to go over and use somebody else's radio, maybe, I don't know, I mean, something like that.
Stephen?
I'm thinking like the first officer to pull him over was probably the one in charge of the situation. And then the rest that came to back him up, you know, and they've got one guy that's, you know, communicating or talking to the subject, and everyone else is, you know, like we've stated, you know, they're in positions around. So I mean, I don't think he's going to walk to another car, and I don't think he's going to take his focus off of someone else, you know, off the subject, you know, to get someone to use their, you know, their loudspeaker. But I mean, I don't know the situation.
What do you think of what Stephen said? Les? I'd like to get, if your comments about what Stephen just said, I'd like to get it. If not, I'll get to you in just a minute. What do you think about what Stephen said?
I agree.
What's that? You agree, Paul? Why? Tell me why.
I mean, if the cop, from what it sounds like, he's already out of his car, weapon drawn, yelling instructions at the other guy, he's not going to take his attention off to go tell someone else to call him on a loudspeaker.
So why doesn't just another officer just say something? Carolyn, excuse me.
I was,
Mr. Hand.
don't most officers have like a way they can talk right there, like right up near there? And couldn't that officer then say to some other officer, hey, my thing's, the speaker's not working,
Oh, they've got
can
that
you do
thing on
that?
their shoulder.
Okay, microphone on shoulder. Why didn't they use that? Patience?
That's what I was gonna say, like, they have radios, couldn't they just radio to the other officer, hey, I'm not able to get a hold of this guy. See if you can control the situation, because my megaphone is not working right now.
Okay. Colleen?
I'm just assuming there wasn't time because me as being pulled over, I'm already nervous, but I'm trying to do everything they want me to do, but I have no idea what it is. So I'm busy opening my car, trying to get out, and so I don't know if they're what, I would like to know the time. It was their time for someone else to
Someone
get
to
on
do
their
that.
horn.
Okay, yeah, we're probably gonna need to go through that. But Stephen, yes, what?
I guess I just have to know, like, what their, for the police, you know, when they do pull someone over, you know, what the guidelines are when you have, you know, felony stop. I mean, you know, yes, you could radio to someone like, you know, hey, I need you to get on your loudspeaker, but at the same time, you've already made contact with the subject, and you're trying to get him to focus on you and follow your instructions. And now if you have him switch his focus, I mean, is that gonna cause a problem? I don't know.
Okay, yeah,
This does have to do with that. When pulling over a vehicle, you are the, I don't know what term to use, but.
We'll just say primary.
The primary, you become the, if an arrest is made, the arresting officer. So you would have to take the lead, and maybe that's why it wasn't passed to a different.
I think that's a good segue for us to say, Georgia, why didn't somebody else? Who's there?
Well, Officer Lane did try to use the PA system and reached in, you know, he's out of the car, he's out of his patrol car, and he's protected by the open door. He's on his driver's side. He does reach in, tries to use the PA system. It does not work. He is yelling instructions as loud as he can, and as the primary officer, you want only one set of instructions. If you get a whole bunch of instructions coming from different places, or if somebody else starts using their PA system from a different configuration, because the car may be, you know, 20 feet to the left, for example, or to the right of Officer Lane. That means that the suspect is turning around in the car and he's trying to figure out what to do. You don't want confusion on the part of the suspect. You want him just to focus on that one voice and to do what is said. And that's typically the way it works.
Okay, Ted, from the plaintiff's perspective.
Well, from the plaintiff's perspective, it seems to me like it would have been very easy to simply ask somebody else to use the PA system, give the standard trained warnings as to what you're supposed to do about putting your hands on your head and turning around and doing all that, particularly in light of the fact that they were right next to a construction site and it was noisy.
Okay, just a minute. Statement number B, same page 14. Based on what you know right now, write the following statement in there. They should have used another PA. Agree or disagree with it? How strongly and why? And while they're writing, I'm going to talk to both of you outside for just 1 second. And I kept not answering your question for about the last 15 minutes, so tell us about the question.
Was all the police vehicles, were they all Phoenix police, or were they different agencies?
And you know what I always do? Why does that make a difference? How does that help us figure this out?
Different policies and procedures.
Different policies, okay. Excellent. Were there different?
They're all Phoenix police
Also,
officers.
okay. Anybody else have a specific question like that we need to answer? Okay, so what I'm going to do, Ted, do you have a diagram of the area we're talking about? I'm going to ask Ted to put the first photo.
Well, what I'm gonna do, I think to start is to, I have an aerial photograph.